Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar today. We've invited a really great group of people to join us. David Miller is here, which I think many of you know or have met on webinars in the past. David has really helped to step in the last year to help guide our information that we've been sharing and putting out there. So thank you, David, for that. I think many of you know him, or if you haven't gotten to know him, you'll be enjoying this conversation. And then we have three of the growers that we've had the privilege of working with for the last couple of years. And our reason for having conversations like this is because it's very clear that while we as a team have tried to we do our best to stay really well informed and to be constantly learning about agronomy and how to develop the best agronomic management systems that really deliver profits very quickly in this different type of management system. Just knowing agronomy doesn't mean that you know farming. And many of us are also farmers, many of us are also homesteaders and so forth. But it's very valuable to hear from growers directly in the field. And that's why we have invited Steve and Boe and David to join us here. So I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us, and I'll love to have you share just a bit about your background, your farming context. Tell us a bit about your operation, the transitions you've made, and what it is that you'd like to share with your audience. Now, we're just going to have a fun conversation here. And you can type in, for our audience listening in, you can type in any questions that you have into the Q&A, and we're going to try to bring those up in the course of conversation as well. So thanks everyone for being here. David Miller, I'm going to turn it to you for a quick intro if you have anything to add, and then we'll just go around the circle.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And I don't have anything to add to the intro except it's wonderful to be with a group of people again and sharing the experiences we've had. Just always inspired when I consider the effort and the energy that gets put into producing food. And I want to take this moment to thank the three growers that we have here on the call, as well as all of you growers who might be listening in for producing food. And I hope that in this conversation today, you will be encouraged, inspired, and continue to continue in this career of producing food. We need food if we're going to be healthy. So we're going to start out by just having a quick intro of each of the farms here. So Steve, you're the first on my left here. Maybe you want to go first and just share a bit about your operation and yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am an organic raisin grape grower out of the Central Valley of California, the Fresno area. I've taken over the business from my father about 7 years ago. Last year was 300 acres. Now we're up to 350. Got some more land this year, so excited about that. And I began my journey through regenerative agriculture 5 or so years ago. Once I learned of John, I had the privilege of meeting him at an event out here, and I've gone down the rabbit hole sorts of regenerative agriculture, and it's got me where we're at today, which is going quite well, and I'm very pleased with my experiences so far.
Great, thank you, Steve, and we'll look forward to hearing some more details about that. Boe, we'll have you go next.
Hey everybody, yeah, Boe Clausen. I'm out of in Washington State. I farm in the Columbia Basin project. It's all irrigated ag, mostly hay, grains, and cattle. And yeah, I started down this kind of a path a couple of years ago when I kind of ran across a friend shared a link of John's podcast, and it got me thinking totally different than what I've been doing in the past. So I was definitely, let's say, a conventional farmer raising the normal crops. We do have a feed yard, and the manure has always been my base of my fertility program. And then call it nitrogen, sulfur, whatever I needed commercially to take care of everything else from there. This last year or two, I started working with some of the AEA staff and doing a lot of analysis and kind of flipped my whole program around on what I believe what was possible to do with our farm. So only 2 years in on this, one full year of confidence this last year on changing my perspective on how I look at farming. So that's kind of a quick background on myself.
Excellent. Very interesting. Thank you, Boe. David, we'll go to you next, and I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. You can just kind of merge right into this of what was your biggest motivator in adopting regenerative agriculture? So if you want to share a bit about yourself and then just go right into the story of what got you started and your journey in this new model of agriculture thus far.
Sure. My father passed away about 4 years ago, and I took over the farm, and we were heavy synthetic inputs, heavy tillage, and I just kind of didn't quite agree with that. I started investigating on YouTube, where everybody goes, and my biggest motivator was human health. And then one video led to another, and then that started to get me down the path of regenerative agriculture. And to me, it's a no-brainer that that we need to start implementing these practices. I'm in Southern Illinois, corn and beans mainly, and then cover crop. And I also have a 14-acre blackberry farm that I started about 4 years ago. And so I've got a lot on my plate and everything, but the salt-based fertilizers and all that and the pesticides, I knew that wasn't right. I knew there had to be a different answer. And so, but what got me started was the human health aspect of it. I had a younger brother who passed away from leukemia about 10 or 11 years ago. And, there's kind of a direct correlation with glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's and leukemia and all those illnesses. And so that's what really got me motivated to start on this, because the way I look at it, if I'm going to help feed the world, I'm not going to do it with poison.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, John.
Feeding the world and poisoning the world are kind of oxymoronic, so it's a great assessment.
Well, thank you, David, and looking forward to continuing that journey. And what a noble cause and reason. Let's go to Boe. Why? What motivated you to get started? And tell us a bit about the journey and the story of how you started on this journey.
My journey started from manure. Manure is my base of my fertility. About 30 years having a local feed yard and supplying my needs with manure. And then manganese was my Achilles heel. When I look at all the manure I put on my fields, when I test manure, I see what the amount of manganese that I'm putting on my fields. And then I test my crops in my soil, and it's not there. And all of a sudden, 5 years, I asked my local agronomist, where is it? Why can't I find it? I test my manure, and I'm applying twice as much manganese as any crop would ever remove. And when I look at 30 years, my soils are still deficient in manganese. And I could not get any local person to answer that question. I talked to the local lab and the soils lab, and he explained, yeah, it's mineralized. And that's it. He had no other ideas on where to go from there. And so then a couple of years ago, so we had used to lease out our ground for potatoes, and they would come in and fumigate for potatoes. Once every 5 years, our ground would get rotated potatoes, and partnering with it. And anyways, that actually led me to John Kempf, where the local potato farmer sent me a link on one of his podcasts, because I think we had the conversation about it. And so I went down that road and actually got answers on the interactions of manganese and why it's being mineralized or where it's at. And then, so at least I didn't have answers how to fix my problem, but I knew where to start looking. And I needed an education on myself on what to do. And so that led me down that path of looking at things totally different. And so I went down the path of trying to capitalize on my manure, my fertility, to make the best of what I have. And the deeper I dig into it, and with the soil health, manures, and everything, the more it all aligns to what I'm doing. I'm a hay, grain, and cattle. We do a lot of cattle because trying to maximize our area. Also, when you look at the regenerative ag, I have all the facets to do it. I have the manure-based, I have the cattle, I have the land, I have the irrigation, I have everything in my hands to do it, to be self-sustaining and not rely on somebody else to for my outside inputs. And so that's the deciding factor for me. I did not want to have to be relying on purchasing commercial fertilizer from somebody else. So that was, I gotta say, that was where it started for me. And it's still basically it's a paradigm where I don't know where to end. I still have more unanswered questions, going down this road. But anyways, I don't know if I go on or let somebody else explain a little bit.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Boe. And exciting that it's a journey, and it's like you're seeing so much already from it and learning so much, but where's it going to end? Like, what are the possibilities? What are the opportunities? It's really an exciting journey that I don't know that we have a destination for it. I don't think we're going to arrive at some point and be there. It's great. Thank you. Steve, what caused you to even consider regenerative agriculture?
For me, I think taking over the operation from my father has given me like this like rude awakening of the threats that we're all facing, and as particularly in my area with water and labor prices, there's just a lot of things driving us out of business, and a lot of things that are like amplifying or augmenting our business. So the prospect of regenerative agriculture making things easier on yourself each year after the next, that was probably the initial appeal. Like if I can start building soil health and get the system running in a more holistic manner, that nature is going to help me out and I'm not going to be fighting it as much. So that was the initial appeal, I would say. Also, I'm kind of a skeptic by nature. So the fact that people think that they have, agriculture wrapped up, and in my area, there's lots of very large, very successful farmers that are very confident in their abilities and have done well. But I've always thought maybe there's another way to do it, especially a way that's more in line with nature, that's not as heavy-handed with the harsh chemistries and things that are commonplace around here. So that's what got me going.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's excellent. This wasn't on the list, but it'd be awesome to hear John tell us just briefly what motivated him. John? What motivated you to start regenerative agriculture?
David, a bazillion people have heard my story. I've repeated it about a bazillion times too. So I think I'm really, obviously there were the significant changes that we had on the farm, but there is this mantra it's really a marketing slogan by big agribusiness that we have to feed the world, and that's the people who repeat that mantra the most are the people who are growing corn and soybeans and commodity crops, who many of which don't go to feed the world, but that's a different conversation. But we have this epidemic of degenerative illnesses here in North America, and to some degree around the world, but particularly in North America. And where we have, I saw the data actually just this morning. I was looking at some of the updated data. 43% of the people in the U.S. are obese right now. It's like 43%. Like, why would we consider that to be acceptable? It's common, it's normal, but why is that acceptable? And so, that is not just an agricultural problem by any means. It's also a dysfunction of food processing and the ingredients that are permitted to be put into processed food. So that's a contributing factor as well. There's environmental factors. But there is also the fact that agriculture and food production contributes a lot of endocrine disruptors. We call them pesticides. But these pesticides are endocrine disruptors, and they screw up our hormonal systems in ways that we're just beginning to understand. And that can contribute to making people obese and all types of degenerative illnesses like stroke and diabetes and heart disease. And of course, it really messes up with all of our collective reproductive systems as well. I mean, that is the foundation of our endocrine system after all. So when you think about all of the cancers that are related to reproductive systems, all the way from prostate cancer to breast cancer to ovarian cancer and uterine cancer, and the list just kind of goes on and on. That's a significant proportion. And so I'm really inspired by the potential that we have to eliminate and remove those toxins from our food supply or greatly reduce them simply by producing crops that don't require them.
Great. Thank you, John. I remember when you first started describing that and what that meant to me. That's great. Steve, Boe, David, do you all have any questions for each other in what was shared about the journey you've been on?
Not necessarily
No,
yet.
that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, that's not fine. No problem.
There is
going to go to the next question.
There is a question in the chat for Boe, and Boe, the question is, where did the manganese go?
Good question. It's still there. I just got to get it released. So that's basically what I can do is, and basically I'm told it's biology. You know, I need better biology and change my practices. So I'm conventional farmer. I love the plow for many years. Got my best crops following the plow, and but I believe doing that excessive tillage has mineralized it. So no, it is still there. It's in a bank. It's in my soil bank. So I look at it, I got 30 years build up of manganese, and someday it's going to pay off. So my that are going to get the biggest benefit from our misapplications or tillage, what we've done in the past. But I believe my soils are going to provide for the next generation. They just as long as we treat it better, I think it's going to be there. And it proved this year. I did a corn crop where I followed first cutting alfalfa and then come back with corn. And I have the least amount of inputs I've ever put into a corn crop. Yet my soil samples before going in were lower than all the rest of my farm. It had been 5 years previous since I applied manure in front of alfalfa hay. Previous, I did a wrinkle CP, a manure, wrinkle CPs, 3 years of alfalfa hay production. I removed probably 35 ton of alfalfa hay dry matter. And then in this last year, I took an early first cutting and then followed it with corn. And I did foliars only and direct seeded into the alfalfa. And I got an average yield as my whole farm. Planted a month later than everything else on the farm. And I got, going to say the whole farm was 250 bushel average. There's areas up to 300 bushel in there in it.
Oh.
18 pounds of applied nitrogen, foliar only. 4 pounds of phosphorus, 7 pounds of potassium, plus micros. Really small amount of micros. I mean, so I would have never believed it could be done and I could do it until I'm going to say listen to John's podcast and enough other people call it preaching and say it can be. So with the high price of fertilizer and knowing that alfalfa is a resilient crop to follow, I said this is as good a year to gamble as any. With the corn crop price and the price out there, I said I'm going to gamble. I'm going to try. I did a third of my acres that way, or a little over, with reduced inputs, and my yields did not change. And my soil samples were virtually identical on composite samples before and after. So I have more questions again now on
That's a pretty incredible story. What did you do with the alfalfa planting? Was that terminated?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And yeah, we of course we use glyphosate. Yeah, pre-harvest and one application post. So I'm going to say a few of your other friends have called it glyphosate addict, whatever. I have not figured out how to wean myself off of that. It's everything's a slow process, and you do a little bit at a time and slowly change. But I'm getting a lot of confidence really quick and fast here that I can change my methods and without fear of going broke. Because most of it, we don't want to go broke. everything. We got one bad year or 2 bad years, I can almost take you out. So we're always very cautious about what we're doing financially. But I have less puts in this field, and I got the same return, and if not some of them higher yields. My conventional program ended a month earlier, and full inputs of pre-plant commercial fertilizer, anhydrous, side dress, and fertigating, and I have as good or better yields with the foliars, and so it's changed my whole perspective of how I'm farming.
One of the things that David talks about is how important it is to run trials at a safe level so that if things don't go well and you do have a failure, you're not at financial risk. So I'm curious about how do the economics turn out for you on the areas with the foliar only versus the full inputs?
Honestly, I'm my total inputs were everything were with applications. I did 3 foliars with a helicopter. I got $130 worth of fertility applied. Call it $39 for the flights of helicopters, $13 an acre application. So I'm less than half of my inputs with application than my conventional. And so yeah, and the tough part to explain is there's not the pounds of nutrients applied. So you don't. It's mental. You don't feel like you're getting that value, that pound for pound, dollar for dollar, whatever. It's. I mean, I'm using micro rates, but some other friends work with that talk about the efficiencies of foliar scale. So I was using a 7x on nitrogen, and finding a nitrogen that had multiple sources in it, and it correlated. So when I look at what my soils had and what I applied, and use some of these call it scales that I could find a few people have, it correlated. It matched up where I got 250 bushels of corn harvested. When I looked, my soils had potentially 115, 120 pounds total available nitrogen before, and after was the same. And then I applied 18 pounds of nitrogen and a 7x. I'm going to say that's rounded up to 140 pounds equivalent. So that was giving me the old rule of thumb for 1 pound of nitrogen per bushel. It works out on that way. I mean, you can sell it however you want, but it works out that way that, okay, there was 1 pound of nitrogen totally available between soil applied with the efficiency scale. But when I took my soil sample afterwards, it was all still there. And I think I did have one field I portioned out. I did the soil primer on, and there was no yield difference, but my soil levels were higher there. Not a lot, but a little bit. And the micros too. Some of the micros were coming around. And so my soil fertility was actually higher. When you use a nitrogen scale of for how many pounds of nitrogen per bushel, I was 0.02 on the soil primer field. My whole other field was 0.12 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. Matt, what it cost me. So that is phenomenal. I have been doing 250 to 350 plus pounds of nitrogen available to a corn crop and trying to average 300 bushel corn in the past with my conventional program. And so, yeah, I should have been doing things on a small scale and changing. No, I didn't do it on a small scale in my mind. I took a big percentage of my acres, but it worked. And I think there's enough people helping me out here that I felt confident. And actually, sap analysis was a huge part of it. So following the sap, because nitrogen was what I was tracking, and following, I did tissues and sap side by side because I don't understand the sap, and I had my Jim Dunlop working with, helping me read the sap through the season and track it. And honestly, that was the confidence booster to let me do it. Track the old and the new leaves and see when that plant truly needed more. And when you listen and hear an AEA agronomist tell you, go ahead and put a little bit of nitrogen on, then it feels good. And a little bit is 4 pounds, 6 pounds of nitrogen total, and put a little bit on. And I was used to putting on 25 pounds a shot. If I'm going to put nitrogen on, make it worthwhile. No, it's totally different, and it works. So.
Thank you, Bo. There's a question that's come through for you on chat regarding your experience. What is your soil organic matter?
1.6 to 2% organic matter. And that's the other thing. No, so I had been doing mostly alfalfa, hay, corn, manure program for, let's say, 30 years. My organic matter has gone up 0.5%, and it's not moving. And I've been trying to get it up higher, and it does not move. And so that's kind of led me down the path that it's probably tillage. I'm going to say oxidizers, like too much nitrogen, a lot of other deals. So I am on par with, or a little bit higher than maybe some of my neighbors, but not when you look at call it the alfalfa, hay, corn rotation. And I thought I should have been building, and with the manure program, that I thought I should be building more high organic matters, and I'm not. And so now it's on trying to figure out how to still change my methods on tillage.
Yeah, lots to figure out there, Bo. There's an interesting follow-up conversation we can have when we get there, but there's a chance that some types of manure will actually deplete organic matter. I don't know that sounds oxymoronic, but the way that it affects soil biology can actually have a negative effect on soil organic matter, which is something that we don't often think about. So, Bo, thanks for sharing that story and that context. And I'd like to go to David. I had the privilege of meeting David last week at the Acres USA conference for the very first time, and David, you shared a story one evening about the success that you had this last year with spotted wing Drosophila on your blackberries, which really got my attention. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think you actually did a fist pump whenever I told you that.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, this next year, next spring, next summer will be my 5th harvest year with the blackberries. And every year we've had the SWD issue. Every year we have. One year we lost almost the whole crop, at least half of it, to the SWD. And we didn't do a fall primer last year this time, or in the fall last year. But Rochelle did have us on a 7 to 10 day foliar throughout the spring and summer, going throughout the season. And some things that we noticed were the fruit was very firm. It didn't fall off the vine as easy as it had in the past. I mean, you actually had to pull it when it was even ripe. And so that was one good issue. It all came into harvest. The harvest time was all within a week or so. It wasn't spread out real long. But we even have catch cans and stuff out for the SWD, and we didn't find any. And so that's the only thing that we had changed from the previous year, minus we did put a cover crop of, I believe it was radishes out, in between the rows. So that's the only change that we made. So that's what I think it was due to. And SWD is a major issue with the berry farmers and everything. It's a big issue. And
David,
yeah,
there's probably many growers listening to us who are not familiar with SWD and berry crops. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is and why it's a problem, and why it's a difficult problem?
Well, you're probably more qualified to tell it than I am, but it's a family of the fruit fly, and the female has a saw-like apparatus on her back end, and she will saw into ripe or overripe fruit and lay her eggs in there, and then of course that ruins the fruit. And then you'll get like a fermenting smell out in your field, and the stuff will start dropping, and it basically ruins your crop. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but it's just a pest that came over from China or somewhere not too long ago. It started in California, I believe, worked its way this way, and I think it's been around the Midwest for a decade, maybe a little bit longer than that. But moral of the story is we didn't have any, none at all. We didn't have any in our catch cans or anything.
And that's a significant story, because SWD is not one of those things that just quietly fades into the night. It's not an easy pest to get rid of. So that's pretty remarkable.
Well, evidently it's still around, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah.
I believe they kind of live in the wooded area and everything. But do you want to add to that as far as your definition of them, or?
Well, what I get really excited about the example that you shared is we have any number of historical examples of working with berry growers and a number of different berry crops, ranging blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, and so forth, where they were able to grow a berry crop that had no SWD in the crop. And perhaps the most remarkable example of this was when there was an organic blackberry field across a farm roadway, probably 30 feet apart from a conventionally farmed blackberry field that was under different management, and the blackberry crop was completely destroyed. And the organic crop that was being managed with nutrition, you couldn't find any SWD in the crop. So that's pretty powerful. But all of those historical examples that we've had, or I shouldn't say all of them, but many of them have been a result of an extended time period on a nutritional program, a year and a half, 2 years. And what I got excited about from your example was you went from basically from 0 to 60 in a single growing season. You didn't,
we
do
were
a fall application.
Yeah, we were doing pesticide applications every 7 to 10 days in the previous years. And the thing that really caught my attention is I came across a YouTube video that you had, and I watched that, and I'm like, well, that makes sense, And so, like I said, that's the only thing we changed. We gave it the nutrition that was recommended. No pesticide applications at all. So basically, we were organic this year, because we didn't do any synthetic fertilizers either. And my buyer, it's a pretty big buyer. I don't want to say who it is, but whenever I told him we were going to do this, he said, what are you going to do about SWD? And so there's a lot of people that are either misinformed or don't know exactly this crazy path that we're taking. And I said, well, I'm going to do this. I said, I'm going to make a healthy plant. And I said, insects don't attack healthy plants. And he basically hung up on me. And so that's what we did, and it worked out. The yield 2 years ago wasn't that great, but the yield did go up 100% this year. And we need to talk more on how to get that bumped up even some more. But yeah, like you said, it was 0 to 60 in a season.
That's impressive. That's just really impressive to go no historical fall applications of biology, just starting this spring with nutrition, and in the first year getting resistant. The reason I'm impressed by that is the fruit are usually the last location on the plant to become resistant to insects. It's not that difficult to achieve insect resistance on leaves, but the fruit have such higher nutritional requirements that those will often be the last location to be resistant, and yet you got that in the first year, so that's really impressive.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't mention is in the previous years we've had a Japanese beetle problem really bad, and they feed on the foliar and all that, and we didn't have the Jap beetles hardly at all either.
That's awesome.
There's another bonus for you.
Stephen, how are you going to top those two stories?
I have a couple good ones actually. I would say like the biggest like aha moment, I guess if you want to call it that, was we used to have really significant challenges with spider mites. 2018 in particular was a terrible year. The block that I'm sitting right now is 150 acres, and we probably had 90 or so acres that were completely defoliated in August, like brown, dead leaves, when they shouldn't be looking like that. To the following year and up until now, we are experiencing zero spider mite pressure, which I attribute to the nutritional program. Like David was mentioning, insects don't attack healthy plants. So since we've adjusted our management practices, reducing our tillage was big. Getting our irrigation situated was critical as well. But I think the nutritional shift that we made, and using sap analysis and revamping our entire nutrition program, and that's what's the driving force behind the plant's resistance to spider mite. So now I no longer spend time, money, resources spraying pesticides. We're completely off. We're using nutrition as our pesticide program. And then a side effect to that was there's another pest that's a lot more difficult for a lot of grape growers, and that's mealybug, vine mealybug. We didn't have terrible pressure from the vine mealybug, but there were hot spots. There were little locations where you'd see, a lot more prevalent. And since we started utilizing these nutritional programs, it's been completely eradicated. I can't even find the black sticky vines that I used to find in the growing season. They just have gone away, which that was a very strong indicator that things are going right. And then 2021, we actually had our record yields and fantastic quality as well, which in the raisin industry, those things are kind of like mutually exclusive. When your yields go way up, your quality is going to go down. And we are improving our quality and our yields simultaneously. So that just really hammered home that this is the way that we're going to do things in the future.
Wow, that's impressive. So, Steve, given the pattern that you've observed so far, what do you expect to happen in the future with your grape production? I mean, as you just described, with grapes, you typically expect to see, if you see yields go up, you see quality go down, and you're not observing that. So where are the goalposts now?
Well, it's not perfect. We're still, the numbers in raisins is your maturity is 50 is the mark where you're not losing money. We're not taking money from you. So I'm just now getting my grades from this last year, from 2022. And my lowest grades are mid 50s and my highest are pushing 70. So that's fantastic, but it can still go higher, which I'm hoping to accomplish. But those numbers are particularly interesting for me because we experienced record heat this year. There were 8 straight days over 110 and 5 straight days 115. So the quality, like the industry has had terrible quality this past year, and I'm not seeing that same. I'm less than the year before, yes, but I'm still well above where I need to be in terms of not having a financial detriment because of the quality standards. So I hope I can keep repeating that. If we're dealing with these same pressures and stressors and lack of water here in California and increased temperatures, that if I can keep building this resilience, that's where I'm trying to be. That's my goal.
Thank you, Steve. So I have a question for all of you that John Warmerdam asked in the Q&A. It's a really good question. He said, using regenerative ag can be like stepping into another dimension where what you think you know doesn't apply anymore. I think that's a kind way of saying an Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole. What have you learned, either from success or from failure, about your crops that has surprised you? Boe, why don't you kick us off? What has surprised you?
Surprised me the most is truly do not know what a crop needs nutritionally. We're taught from the local agronomist that we need so many pounds of potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen to raise a crop, whether a crop it is. Now going down to the side, we don't know what we actually need to apply. Now it's what can our soils provide for us instead. And so it's changed my perspective. Like I say, what do our soils truly have in them, and rather than applying a commercial fertilizer. So I have that, and feeding the plants foliarly. Like the other guy said too, with the corn, spider mites is really common here, especially with the high heat. It's that apply spider mites. Now with you guys a couple years ago, I applied foliars instead. So I might have put a little bigger cocktail together. It cost me $10 more an acre than an insecticide for spider mite. But you know what? I fed the plant was healthier, and I stayed a check. So now I gained return dollars per acre. To me, that was a no-brainer. All of a sudden, feeding the plant instead of attacking the pests. And it's changed the whole perspective. And what do you? Why do you have a problem? What's causing it? It's most of the local agronomists want to do the old silver bullets: one problem, one solution. Now it's I got a problem. Well, what caused it to show up, and what can I do to suppress it? You don't have to get rid of it. You just need to suppress it, hold it back, let the plants take care of itself. So to me, yeah, like I say, it is a big rabbit hole that the further I go down this trying to understand agronomy, the more I realize I don't have a clue. And I do again with your podcast because like I say, there's some of those that I have listened to probably 10, 15 times, and I still don't comprehend all of it. But every time I listen to it, I get the aha moments, things I can start relating to them, and the just the range of people that you have following, and the depth of knowledge, experiences that is refreshing. That's why that's kind of say my biggest draw to the AEA community is just looking at things totally different and sharing the experiences. Because like I said, I'm conventional ag, but for the most part, I could be organic real easy. I don't have a preference one way or the other. I don't mind pesticides if they're applied right and safe, but at the same time, if I can do something nutritionally rather than a pesticide, what is the risk reward? I'd rather do something for my family, my employees that are like family, just as much family that puts them at less risk in my soils and everything. So that's what's driven me to change. So like I say, it's we work with our employees and family, and so if I can eliminate pesticides, large dose commercial fertilizer, I will. And if I can make my ground self-sustaining, I will. So
That sounds like Alice in Wonderland to me, Bo.
it is.
Yeah, thank you. David, we'll go to you next. What have you learned from your crops that has surprised you?
Um, with the regenerative part of it, it's not necessarily from the crop. Well, from the crop aspect, a big yield variation in the, I guess you could say, in the same pass in the field. You know, beans will go from 30 to 90 in the same pass and just jump all over the place. And I believe Rick Clark had even mentioned that down there at the Acres conference, is that when he was making this transition, he noticed that big time, that there was a huge yield variation, you know, in the same pass of the field. And a little bit further, not necessarily what a crop has taught me, but, you know, the regenerative path, build it and they will come. In 2.5, 3 years, I went from no earthworms at all to over 30 per square foot, 6 inches deep. And I couldn't believe that there'd be that many earthworms, you know, show up. You know, I didn't plant them or anything like that, obviously. You have to be really strong-willed as far as what your neighbors are going to say, you know, and watch who you get information from. Everybody thinks they know a little bit about this that haven't practiced it. And I had one of my seed salesmen tell me last year that he said that cover crops won't grow on flat ground. And he's never grown one in his life. And I thought, well, you know, alfalfa grows on flat ground, but so just watch who you get information from. There's a lot, so much that I don't know. I'll be learning until the day I die. Kind of like Bo said, there's so much information out there. Just dive into it and get as much as you possibly can, and get involved with groups like what you've got, and attend the conferences and different things like that, and just make it a learning journey. And hopefully you're passionate about it. When you're passionate about it, then it makes it a lot more fun. But yeah, as far as the crop goes, you know, I've got a lot to learn yet. But your products are helping me get there a little bit quicker, and your other videos and different things are very informative. And I'd say just dive into it, get as much information as you possibly can.
Thanks, David. Steve, we're coming back to you. What have you learned that has surprised you?
I would say the most surprising thing for me is the amount of things that I felt like I had to do that I don't have to do. So like I mentioned, we're completely off pesticides, no longer a factor. We use sulfur dust to control powdery mildew. I've scaled that back tremendously. I'm probably using 30% or less of what we were using 5 or so years ago. So my dad ordered the sulfur this year, and we still have like 3.5 pallets in the barn because he was doing the old order. So that was pretty surprising. And I keep pushing the limits on that as best I can. I believe the question had something about failures, and I definitely failed at managing weeds this year. I was a little aggressive with my strategy, and I don't need to use pesticides. We're scaling back sulfur. Let's see if we can nearly eliminate our weed control. That was not a good idea. That caused a lot of logistical challenges, not so much for the plant health or anything like that, but yeah, just made it more difficult to harvest and do some of the other practices that are required. But easily the most shocking thing for me is when the plant has all the nutritional requirements and it doesn't have excesses of things, and you're utilizing the SAP analysis, that the potential for it to be completely resistant to all these stressors, to insects, pest pressure, mildews, heat and drought. There's just infinite benefits that I just didn't anticipate.
Steve, there's a question here following up to your comments about your reduction in sulfur and not using any fungicides anymore. Cassandra asks a question, and it's really directed to you specifically, but then to all of you is, what was your transition process? How did you reduce pesticide usage while you wanted to start using regenerative practices and different nutrition management? What's your pathway been for that?
So maybe I should start. The 2018, when we had the really severe spider mite outbreak, was the second year, I believe, that I was using AEA products. So we had 10 acres down the road that we had a good experience with your product. So we decided, okay, we'll do 20 more acres here on this block. And I fly a drone just to crop monitoring and record keeping and whatnot. And I have some pretty shocking images of this block being devoured by the spider mite and all the brown foliage, but the 20 acres that we were using the AEA products on was still green. So that kicked us up our program and expanded our acres rapidly. That was critical and instrumental in our transition, in our confidence, and using these methods to eradicate things. And then I kind of got crazy a couple times and just stopped doing things. I just when you're spending so much time with your land and your plants, I'm sure every grower here knows that you can kind of get a sense of or a feel for the plant's health, overall health. And I felt so confident in a few of these blocks. This block is so strong, and the plants are basically telling me that they're doing well, that maybe we can not do, practice A, B, and C that we were utilizing before, and see kind of what happens. And we started small, and now it's all 300 acres that are being managed this way. So hopefully that answers your question. Just a little bit at a time, and just being in tune with your operation. That's how we did it.
Getting in tune with your operation is something that doesn't easily happen from the pickup truck. Yeah. And it's a very important part of the process. So, Boe, we're going to come to you next because I then have a follow-up question for David. What has I know you mentioned that you're still you're okay using pesticides wisely and carefully. What has your process been like? You're still early on in your transition, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't use a lot of pesticides compared to most. I mean, in corn, virtually nothing. I don't use any fungicide, insecticides. Rarely, I've done some for spider mite control in the past, but and it's been a few years. So but some of my other crops, wheat, triticale for seed I've grown. Honestly, it's when we work with the agronomists that we're raising some of these crops for, like it's a seed crop, they required as a insurance part of their program to put a fungicide on. So they put if you're spraying for weeds, they want you to put a fungicide. So it's just a standard program, preventative. And that is kind of mainstream around here, that's what you do. We get preached again and again that we need to do preventative pesticides. And so it looks at things totally different when you decide, no, let me just hold off and not do it. It's risky because we've done it in the past. We've had great success. It's worked. We get good crops. But was it necessary? And so to pull back and say, no, I'm not going to do it. And it's a little tough because it worked in the past. But we're getting confidence with I think I'm going to go back to testing. When we can test the nutritional value of the plant, and as everybody's doing more and more and getting more and more data, we're getting confidence in what those numbers need to be and have trigger points, and where a plant is truly healthy or not. And you can see it, but also like with sap, you could see it before. So feeling confident that I have a truly healthy plant, then you know that it can sustain pressure from disease, insects. So to me, that's the path I'm going down. I did tissue and sap side by side to try to get a better understanding, because I've done tissue in the past, many years of it, and compounded. So even if I'm spending some of these fields $10, $50, I am good with it, because it's still cheaper than pesticide. And then when you are truly healthy, you're probably going to have a great yield, and everything's going to work out in the end anyways. So yeah. So on the pesticide stuff, the weeds is a tough part. I still have not got my head wrapped around it. I am working on minimizing tillage. I am doing, I'm going to call it double crop, where we have cattle. So we are doing triticale for grazing, ryegrass for grazing after certain crops, and filling into it. So we're trying to keep the ground green and growing as much as possible. But at the same time, with our rotation with corn, we're a bit of a short growing season. By the time we can start growing corn, we put it in, and when it comes off here, nothing will grow after. And so that's a tough part, to have that green and grown and transition, and for weed control. So I have not found out how to deal with that yet, other than I'm looking at more strip tilling and utilizing all the residue that's on top as to suppress weeds. So, and then it goes back to earthworms. Earthworms have been key. Where we were for 30 years, had potatoes in our rotation, because with the high cost of ground inputs and all that, we thought for many years we had to have high potato rent to offset, to lower the risk, take that cash money and rent out of ground for potatoes. And those potato farmers would fumigate. And so we did that for 30 years, till last year was the first year we did not have any potatoes on our ground. Our ground is not fumigated anymore. We had noticed that we had virtually no earthworms, unless after our fourth year of alfalfa hay, before third, fourth year alfalfa hay, we would have earthworms out there. And that's when it would go into potatoes, and then they nuke them and they're gone. And we'd start over again. So we ground rest for 4 to 5 years, build it up between a hay corn rotation, get it back, and then go to potatoes and start over. That was the process. Now, like this year with this double crop, financially, it made so much more money than renting it out for potatoes, and that's only that's narrow-minded in a single year snapshot. But the earthworms, like I say, you go back from the beginning of the season to the end. I went from 2 earthworms to 10, and that's wow. After, and I seen it in my other fields too, that where I was doing ryegrass, triticale, just that little bit of green biomass and all that created a host for the worms in the populations, where I was lucky to find 1 to 2 earthworms out there, and now they come back. And so that's the old canary in the coal mine is earthworms. Keep it extremely simple, because like I said, not that bright, don't always understand what's going on. But if the earthworms are there and they're coming back, things are coming around. And then, so now I'm going to see if I can paint my earthworms green and make them till my ground. And
yeah, well, it's really rewarding to really feel that we are being able to steward life in these living systems, isn't it? And if you actually look at the data on earthworm tillage, I think you'll quickly discover that they are way more efficient than the green machines are, or any other color of paint.
We always, you say that there's nothing better than a plowed field. When as a kid, you go out there and smelling that fresh turned earth and all that. And so when we go out there, that's what we grew up loving that smell of that turned soil. And now we go out there in these alfalfa fields that have had traffic on them for 4 years straight. The ground is rock hard. It is hard. It is less than ideal. It is everything you do not want to plant another crop into. Yet when I just directly seed it right into that corn crop, or that corn crop into that alfalfa stand, the ground is hard. it's resilient. It took water. Usually we have problems with water penetration. We cannot get water into the ground. So we come in with rippers and make dammer dikes, make these potholes in our ground to hold water with irrigation to give it more time to infiltrate. So we do a lot of tillage, everything to help water infiltration. Yet these alfalfa fields, we kind of look back and say, hey, we don't do these practices in our alfalfa fields, yet we're able to get this water in. Why? And so when we looked at this cornfield, that the ground is flat, it's rock hard. I couldn't get a penetrometer in the ground. It is hard, yet the corn crop is resilient, and it finds a way. And all of a sudden, by the end of the year, it's mellow. It's really firm. It's not ideal, but it goes back to what we think is normal and good is no longer the case. So that hard, firm soil, as long as it has earthworm activities, the tunnels, everything going in, is still a lot better than a freshly plowed seed bed in the long run. At the end of the season, that corn crop going into a hard packed alfalfa field is more resilient than our tilled ground. So it's totally different than what we're used to.
Yeah, thank you, Bo. And just reflecting on what you described of the historical use of fungicides and the idea that we should use fungicides prophylactically or as a preventative treatment. I'm so intrigued. The reality is that this is, in my understanding, this is a relatively recent occurrence in the domain of you can't call it IPM, but in the domain of pest management and fungicide applications. It was described to me that, and I may have these dates wrong, but they're close. It was described to me that I think in the 2014 growing season, there was a major disease outbreak in corn across the Midwest. And those growers who had applied fungicides preventatively saw a substantial yield bump. And that prior to that year, applying fungicides as a preventative was just not a routine practice. It didn't happen. And after that year, from 2014 to today, which when you think about it, that's only 8 years. And it's now standard routine practice and recommended by agronomists all the time to apply multiple preventative fungicide applications on corn across the Midwest. So we have 1 year, and now it becomes the new practice. It's remarkable to me how marketing pressure can be used to change the narrative across a whole population so quickly.
Yeah, I like to reflect on aha moments. I grow wrinkle seed peas, and when I look back and call it 20 years of growing wrinkle seed peas, my 2 highest fields I've ever had were it was rented ground, but they were deficit irrigated. The irrigation system was not able to provide enough water. So at the beginning of the season, after irrigating, I could never get that ground as wet and lush and that crop as I wanted. And so subsequently, I did not put the inputs into those fields. These 2 fields, 2 different, they're probably 5 years apart. But I could just barely maintain my moisture levels with irrigation. So I cut out nitrogen, fungicides of a typical program. And those are my highest yield fields in 20 years when I look back and reflect it. And I had gotten similar yields, but never quite to that point but then it got to a point where it was a moron theory where we want to do preventive fungicides and more nitrogen to create a bigger, lusher plant, feed it, and then put on preventative fungicides. And so we were trying that, and our yields were not going up. But yet, so we looked back when I reflected on that, all of a sudden it's like, okay, the 2 years I had my highest yields ever was water management, and no fertility, no pesticides or fungicides, anything. And I had my highest yields, and it's like, why? So then I thought, okay, I just got to manage water better, but maybe I can still do the nitrogen, fertigating is what we did, and fungicides. Well, I still kind of plateaued. So the last couple of years, I kicked out completely, and it went back to actually when we started looking at the recommendations we're getting, where we're putting on UN 32 at early bloom. We're loading it up, thinking we're going to make a bigger, healthier plant, and yet start to realize that maybe I started to realize that I might be creating a negative effect with the nitrate nitrogen. And I had no perspective on that before until listening to some of you guys say, no, the wrong product, wrong time, or right product, right time. And all of a sudden what we were doing was counterintuitive. So for the local salesman, it was ideal. High levels of nitrate, nitrogen, and double preventive fungicides. 3 fungicides a season and 3 large applications. Of nitrogen, just big bulk applications, and we went knock it all out completely. And they still get called good average yields, but I believe that yielding crops now from it. And
There's an effect of, a number of crops have developed this. I don't think it was deliberate or intentional, but gradually the agronomic practices have evolved so that we're attempting to manage nutrition or manage agronomy with one foot on the gas pedal and the other on the brake. And that has huge detrimental consequences to plant health and it's not giving us higher yields. So, David, I want to come back to you. I've got 2 questions for you, and then we're going to do one final round of one question yet for each of you. David, so we've been having this conversation about pesticides. What has your transition been of how you have reduced or removed pesticides from your operation? And then if you could also reflect a bit on, there's a question that came through for you on tillage. How has your tillage evolved on your broadacre crops?
Pesticides, I just cut them out. And I tell you the challenge, I just met with my seed dealer yesterday, and I'm wanting to get, I still have an issue with weeds. I'm in like a cereal rye, plant beans after cereal rye, and then use that for suppression. I let the cereal rye get about 5 to 6 feet tall as I possibly can. And that will cut out, at least my first glyphosate pass. But the challenge I've got now is I still need to go with a GMO seed, like an E3 or something like that, to where I can have that on the back burner. If I need to spray it, I can later. But I'm wanting to get away from the treated seeds. And my dealer does not sell GMO seeds that is not treated. And so I know we talked about this at the Acres conference, and I believe you were asked the question, something about, I believe it was, how do I get rid of, this insect or whatever? You said, quit killing the beneficials with your seed coating. And so that's really important to me. But so now I'm going to have to get a hold of this company and find out if they can whip up a batch that's not treated. And so I just started growing a healthier plant. I cut out synthetics. I mean, I don't recommend this at all because I did a lot of acres at one time, but I cut out the synthetics, and now I've moved to your products as far as foliars and have had good luck with that. It's just this year was the only year I tried that, but it was a double yield. It was twice as much the yield as where I didn't have the no application basically. And then what was the second part of that question?
Reflect on how your tillage has evolved. You described that when you took the farm over, there was very intensive tillage. How have you been able to transition that?
Yeah, we've got a lot of bottom ground, and there's a minimal amount of tillage that I still do. And the reason for that is because this bottom ground has been so heavily tilled for years and years and years that when it floods, you take soil away rapidly. And so I've got these bottom fields where there's potholes and depressions and stuff like that. So what I've done is basically laser leveled those fields, to make them flat again. And so whenever I do that, I will do a tillage pass just to clean it up a little bit. But then after that field has been fixed, I go 100% no-till. A challenge so I started doing that 4 years ago when my dad passed away. He would do no-till beans, but then he would do it commercially. He would conventionally till for the corn crop, because one year he had a mouse problem or something that came and ate all the corn seed. And so it scared him. He would never no-till corn again. But when I started, I started no-tilling and just have been committed to doing that. A challenge that I do see is that when I'm planting into the heavy rye, I'm talking, I'll plant 100 acres or 100 pounds of rye. I'll drill it in the fall, and then I've got a lot of biomass come spring and time to plant. It takes my beans a while to emerge, but I haven't tried your planter application yet. So I will be doing that this year. I'm hoping that fixes the challenge there. But, when it comes to, some people don't realize how much CO2 that tillage puts in the atmosphere. And it's a tremendous amount that we can capture by planting green out of the atmosphere. And the erosion aspect, there's a picture from the Dust Bowl of a big cloud of dust from the 30s. And then there's a picture from Phoenix, Arizona a few years ago that looks exactly the same, except the picture from Phoenix is not black. The dirt the organic matter is gone. So the erosion is a big issue. That's why I do the no-till. I don't want to kill all the earthworm holes, the biology that's been built up, because the way I look at it is, if you've got this system, the way I look at it to explain easily to somebody is the days when we had phone lines connected everybody together. And if you go through and you cut all those lines together or cut all those lines off, that's basically like screwing up the biology of the soil. The networking and the communication and everything is you got to rebuild that. I did notice, and I have a question, maybe even for Boe here, or whoever knows the answer to it, is that whenever I do this fixing of the ground that's in these bottoms, it's got, these washouts and stuff, I do notice that where I've tilled, that I have a better yield the following year for sure, than right next door to where it's been no-till. And so that is something, if one of you guys want to address that.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, that's a part with tillage is you get immediate benefit from it. It would be the same with tillage. It's always, I gotta say we had our highest yields behind the plow in tillage, but it's short-lived. So that's the tough part, is coming to understanding that we got to look long-term and years than the short-term. It just, I know it's, just tilling the ground, adding the oxygen, creating that nice new soil for the environment has been ideal for me. But I know long-term it's there's faults to it, so it's a give or take on it.
Yeah, and what I've noticed, I'm about 4 years into no-till now, is that I can go out and roll a cover crop basically an hour after an inch rain, and that ground will hold me. Very little impression in the soil. That ground is so, you could run anything you want over it after an inch of rain, just because it's resilient, it's built up, and obviously you couldn't do that in a tilled field. And I can't hardly stand seeing a neighbor till a field, and then there's a washout, a gully that gets created within one bad rain, because we get some heavy rains here, and then they go and they'll till over it again and correct it, and it's just our topsoil is half gone now, and we've been farming like this for 100 years, and it's not going to last forever, and we have to get into this no-till situation, in my opinion. And it's not just for one benefit. There's so many benefits of it.
Yeah, thank you, David, for sharing those thoughts. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're already run past the hour, so I'd like to wrap things up with a final question for each of you. And David, we'll start with you again, since you have the floor right now. And the question is, what advice do you have for farmers who are just beginning the transition, who are just thinking about beginning to farm in a different pathway? What feedback or what input would you have for them?
Get as much information from credible sources as you can, and don't try to fix it all in 1 year. Don't jeopardize the livelihood of the farm. I know that a lot of people, I was gung-ho, I wanted to fix it all as fast as I could, and you got to be patient, because there's a lot of mistakes, and they aren't failures. They're learning tools. But I would get as much information as you possibly could, network with people like us. I think the good thing about this community is we are all pretty accessible, wanting to help others, and get credible information, and just don't bet the farm. Start off on a small scale, build off your results, is what I would recommend.
Thank you, David. Steve, what are your thoughts?
I would say something similar. I would say I feel like I've learned that my role as a farmer is I don't necessarily need to be like the foremost expert of anything. I just need to know where to find them and to listen to them. So I think that's a critically important thing that growers, everyone's confident. No one knows my land like me. It's a thing you hear a lot. And I think having a sense of community and networking, that is really a critical piece to succeeding. And don't be afraid to fail, because you're going to have some challenges. And like David was saying, just don't bet the whole farm on something. Just take baby steps and seek out individuals that have expertise, and that's going to be your biggest resource. And learn as a community. See if there's other people close by that are doing similar practices, and get their advice, what's worked and what hasn't for them, and that's going to help you stay on the right path and succeed.
Steve, just echoing the one thought that you mentioned, and actually David mentioned this earlier in our conversation as well, is having the resilience to not be dissuaded from the people around us, from our neighbors and the folks at the coffee shop and church and etc. What is it they're going to say about us, and what is their opinion going to be? And I think the most effective antidote to that is surrounding ourselves with like-minded people. Even if they're 100 miles or 500 miles away, if we have someone who shares our values and who is on the journey with us or a couple years ahead of us, having those conversations, those relationships is invaluable. It gives us a buffer and some resilience to the social pressure around us. It's a really, really important piece. Boe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go down the same exact line. You've got to find those trusted partners in your operation. Find those people that hopefully know what you need to know or know where to go. As an example of SAP analysis, it's a black and white map, whatever that, but somebody has to be able to read it, and find those people have an understanding or background of knowledge, and that's the toughest part. And then educate yourself. I don't think we take enough time as farmers to educate ourselves on agronomy. We're used to being the dirty fingers, hands, grease it, just get in the equipment and go. Now we're realizing that there's more to be made on the agronomy side, and understanding, making the right decisions on our inputs, what we do, has a bigger influence on doing the day-to-day tasks. The day-to-day tasks are easy, but making the decisions on the agronomy side has such a big influence. And for me, ROI is always bottom line. And when we look at that, and you can find these trusted partners that have been down that road or know where to give yourself confidence in parameters on choosing how you're going to farm for the year. So just trusted people and educate yourself. And like I say, I gotta give kudos out to you again with your podcast. It's about years in I've been listening to it, and it changed me totally on the education that's out there. My local area agronomists are clueless on some of the things I'll bring up and what I'm looking at. And actually, it's been fun. I played with my local agronomist here, and I didn't tell him what I did on my foliar only program. I told him I haven't been doing anything. Just don't do anything. Don't do anything. Just leave it alone. And so he was kind of baffled of what was going on, but sitting from the outside. And I just kind of wanted to get perspective on what was his opinion on it, on what should be done, and I had my opinion. And it's fun to play with him. And then at the end of the season, we sit down and evaluate what went right, what went wrong, what could we do different. And just before this meeting, we caught up with Jen Dunlop, Kevin, and Ethan, or whatever. They were here, and I was a few minutes late to catch up with you guys because they came in and quick. And it's invaluable at time when you start reflecting on successes and failures with your team. And there's a lot of stuff that we don't always see ourselves, and team gives a different perspective. So share and be open-minded with what you're doing. And like I say, a lot of this, don't be afraid to share your failures, because usually success comes from failures. So move on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to all of you, to David and Steve and Boe. I appreciate you being here and taking an hour plus out of your day to share this with other people. One of the things that I've learned from the blog and the podcast and the stuff that I've done is the more you share with other people, the more you get back in return. So I'm sure you will experience that as well. It's really a privilege to work with all of you on your operations. We thank you for that, and we look forward to having more conversations with all of you again. To everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed it. You find the information useful and valuable. Thanks for being here,